Time erases many things but not a mother's love. It remains even when nothing else is left. Sometimes love is stronger than time. Sometimes waiting becomes eternity. I come here every day. The station lives its own life. It doesn't notice me. It never stops. People pass by rushing, chatting, laughing, waving their hands. Trains arrive and depart, carrying destinies across the world. But I stay. I sit on my bench, next to an old, peeling lamppost. I no longer wait, but I cannot leave. In the pocket of my coat lies a piece of paper folded 4 times. I know it by heart. I run my fingers over it. I feel the roughness of the paper, the faded ink. And I read in my mind the words that changed my life. Mom, I will come back. I promise. I have read them 1,000 times. They have not become any less painful. Once I was different. I laughed. I believed that life was bright, endless, full of possibilities. I had a son. I was his mother. I remember how he first ran to me, arms outstretched, shouting, "Mom, look, I'm flying." I caught him, laughed, spun him in the air. I believed that he would always fly, that nothing would break his wings. But I was wrong. He was 18 when he told me, "Mom, this town is too small for me." I knew this day would come. I saw the way he looked at the train standing on the platform, how his eyes shone with anticipation. I knew it was pointless to hold him back. I didn't cry. I didn't ask him to stay. I just nodded. He placed a note in my palm. "Mom, I will come back. I promise." And then he got on the train and disappeared. First, he wrote to me often. "You should see this city. It's huge. At night, everything sparkles like 1,000 little suns. I've met good people. I like it here. I think you would love this place too." I smiled. I wrote back to him. I told him how my days went, what the weather was like, what the neighbors were saying. I didn't want him to feel lonely. But his letters grew shorter. Brief lines written in a hurry. And then, they stopped coming altogether. I kept writing. I wrote about the first snow, the first spring flowers, the warm summer evenings. I wanted him to remember that he was being waited for. But there was no answer. I wrote again. But soon I realized I was writing into emptiness. I began coming to the station. First just because. I watched the trains, observed the passengers, searched faces with my eyes. I didn't know if I would recognize him if he came back. I didn't know what he had become. But I searched. Time is a strange thing. When you are waiting, it stretches endlessly. When you look back, it seems to have passed in an instant. I no longer know how many years have passed. I don't count. Winter. I wrap myself in a woolen scarf and watch the snow settle on the platform. People hurry, bury their faces in their collars. Isit. I wait. Spring. The ice melts, water runs across the station tiles. I see the sun glinting on the glass windows. I see someone reluctant to let go of someone's hand. I hear someone say, "I will wait." I look away. I have waited too long. Summer. The smell of coffee, the laughter of tourists, light dresses, the shouts of children. I watch a little girl eating ice cream as her father adjusts her hat. I smile. I remember how I once held his hand, how I bought him ice cream, how I laughed with him. I close my eyes. Now only silence. Autumn. Leaves swirl in the air, settle on the tracks, fill the gaps between the platform tiles. I feel the chill, the scent of damp earth. I think about how quickly time passes, how it takes people away, how it leaves me behind. But I am still here. I am still waiting. I clutch the old, yellowed piece of paper in my hands. I read it again. "Mom, I will come back. I promise." I close my eyes. And I keep waiting. I didn't realize at first that the letters had started coming less often. At first, I thought the last one had arrived just a week ago. But then I looked at the calendar and saw that 3 months had passed. Then 6 months. Then a whole year. But I still wasn't worried. I told myself, he's just busy. He has a new life. He's doing well. I didn't want to think otherwise. I sat in my chair by the window and went through the letters. "Mom, you should see this city. It's huge. At night, everything sparkles like 1,000 little suns. I've met good people. I like it here. I think you'd love this place too. I know you worry, but I'm okay. I'll definitely come home for Christmas. I remember how, that year I set the table. I made his favorite apple pie, brewed cinnamon tea. Spent a long time choosing a dress. Even though I knew it was silly. He always said I was the most beautiful, even when I was in a robe with messy hair. I waited. But he didn't come. I wasn't upset. I told myself, it's okay. He just couldn't make it. He probably had things to do. He'll write. And a few weeks later a letter arrived. Short. Hurried. Mom, I'm sorry I didn't come. I was busy. Work, you know how it is. I promise next time I'll definitely come. I read it over and over, sitting in the kitchen holding a cup of cold tea. I smiled. I believed. But then the letters got even shorter. Mom, I'm fine, don't worry. Sorry I haven't written in a while. Just been busy. How are you? I wrote back long letters. Like before. Told him everything. How the first snow had fallen outside the window. How Mrs. Hudson, the neighbor, had brought me homemade jam. How the bench near the entrance had finally been repainted. I wrote because I didn't want him to forget. I wrote because it was my only way to be close to him. But there was no response. I wrote again. And again. And again. But soon I realized I was writing into emptiness. I don't know exactly when I stopped waiting for letters. Maybe after the second missed Christmas. Maybe when I noticed that the postman no longer stopped at my house. Maybe when, for the first time, I asked myself, what if he doesn't remember me anymore? That thought scared me. I pushed it away immediately, closed the drawer with his letters, and pretended nothing had happened. But something inside me had changed. That was when I started coming to the station. First, just because. I sat and watched the trains. Observed the passengers' studied faces. I thought, what if he's looking at me too? What if he came back but doesn't know how to find me? What if he's standing somewhere nearby but is afraid to take the first step? These thoughts were warm, but they also tore me apart. One day I saw a woman with her son. She was fixing his collar, stroking his head, while he squirmed impatiently, trying to break free. I watched them. Her hands. His smile. And suddenly I realized that I no longer remembered what it felt like to touch his face, to feel his hands, to hear his voice up close. I gripped the hem of my coat. It became hard to breathe. I lowered my head and closed my eyes. I didn't let myself cry. I started writing to him again. Not letters, but notes in a diary. I wrote about how my day went, how the sun shone, how the station looked in the morning, how the old kiosk on the corner smelled of coffee. I wrote because I couldn't stop. Because if I stopped, it would mean I had given up. It would mean I had accepted that he was gone. And I couldn't. I kept writing. Stacked the letters in a box. Tied them with a ribbon. But I didn't send them. I didn't know where to send them. I didn't know where he was. I didn't know if he was waiting for them. But I kept writing anyway. I saw how people at the station reunited. How they hugged, laughed, held each other's hands. I didn't envy them. I just waited. I thought that maybe one day, someone would take my hand and say, I'm sorry it took so long. But no one came. One day I came home and saw a letter on the doorstep. I froze. Slowly I bent down and picked it up with trembling hands. I recognized the handwriting immediately. I couldn't believe it. I tore open the edge of the envelope, unfolded the piece of paper. Just one line. Mom, I'm sorry it took so long. I felt my fingers tremble. My heart pound. My eyes fill with tears. I read that line dozens of times. I wanted to find something more, just one more word. But there was nothing else. I clutched the letter in my hands. I didn't know what it meant. I didn't know why he had sent it now. I didn't know where he was. But I knew one thing. He remembered. And that was enough. I was sitting at the kitchen table again. In front of me, a sheet of paper already half filled with familiar lines. How are you, my boy? It's spring here, it's warm already. They were selling your favorite apples at the market today, remember? The ones with the thin red skin that crunch with every bite. I stopped. My pen hovered over the paper. What else could I tell him? That Mrs. Hudson, the neighbor, no longer takes her morning walks? That my favorite bench at the station is now even more worn out? That I'm getting older? That every morning it gets harder to get out of bed? That sometimes I forget why I write these letters? I pulled myself together. I had to write. As long as I wrote, he existed. When the letter was finished, I carefully folded it and placed it in an envelope. I wrote his name on it. And slowly, as if in a dream, I pulled on my coat. I would send it. As always. As I had done all these years. When I entered the post office, a young man stood behind the counter. I didn't know him. Everyone I used to know there was long gone. I handed him the envelope. I need to send a letter, I said. He took it, glanced quickly at the address, then looked at me again. Something flickered in his eyes. I'm sorry. This address no longer exists. I felt the world sway beneath me. What? I asked, not recognizing my own voice. The post office there has been closed. The address has been removed from the registry. But, I swallowed. But how can I reach him? He frowned slightly, as if searching for the right words. Do you have his new address? I didn't know what to say. How could I tell him that I didn't know where my son was? How could I admit that for years I had been sending letters to nowhere? How could I admit to myself that perhaps he hadn't read them in a long time? I took the letter back and stepped outside. The world was the same. The sun was shining. People passed by. But I felt that something had changed. As if that last thin thread connecting me to him had snapped. I held the envelope in my hands. It was light, almost weightless. But it felt heavy as stone. Slowly, very slowly, I unfolded it. Looked at the words written in my own hand. And suddenly I realized something terrifying. I didn't know if he had ever received them. I didn't know if anyone had ever read my words. Or if they had simply been lost in the void. I didn't know if he was still alive. I placed the letter in my pocket. I couldn't throw it away. I simply walked away slowly back home. Because now I knew. He might never read them. But I would keep writing anyway. I couldn't stop writing. I couldn't stop believing. I couldn't stop waiting. I stopped counting the days. Once I used to mark them on a calendar. Red crosses for those that passed without letters. Blue ones for the days I still had hope. But then the colors blurred. Then I stopped marking them altogether. And then, I simply stopped knowing what day it was. I no longer waited for letters. But I couldn't stop waiting for him. It had become my habit. Part of me. A part of my life which had stopped but still kept moving forward. I kept coming to the station. Every day. As if I stopped coming, everything that had ever been between us would disappear completely. Once I knew everyone who worked here. The cashiers, the security guards, the cleaners. I knew their faces, their voices, their habits. But time hadn't stopped for them. They left. New people came. Young. Fast. The kind who looked at me with confusion and slight concern. They found it strange that I was always here. They didn't know why. To them, I was just an old woman at the station. A part of the scenery. Like an old lamppost peeling from time. Like the tracks that no one notices, but which still carry the trains forward. One day a girl sat down next to me. Young. Probably the same age he had been when he left. She watched me for a long time, then asked, "Are you waiting for someone?" I smiled. Yes. She wanted to say something, but her train was announced. She left. And I stayed. The seasons passed me by. I no longer counted them. Winter. I wrapped myself in a scarf and watched the snow settle on the tracks. Spring. The ice melted and I smelled something new in the air, but nothing changed for me. Summer. Children laughed, ate ice cream, traveled with their parents. I watched them and something inside me tightened. Autumn. Leaves swirled, fell onto the platform, and I caught myself thinking that I didn't remember how many autumns I had seen here. I no longer knew how many years had passed. I didn't want to know. I was afraid of one thing. That one day when I closed my eyes again, I wouldn't remember his face. I tried to draw it in my memory. His hands, his eyes, his voice, but the image blurred. Like a photograph left in the sun for too long. I clenched my fingers trying to hold on to something, but time slipped through them like sand. I came to the station again. I sat on my bench, and suddenly I felt someone watching me. I lifted my head. The crowd. Ordinary passengers. But something was wrong. I felt that someone was standing there. In the distance. Someone looking at me. I searched the faces. Faces. And then his silhouette. I froze. Tall. A dark coat. Light hair. I couldn't breathe. Was it him? I wanted to stand up. But at that moment the crowd passed between us. I blinked. And he was gone. I stared at the spot where he had just been. But there was no one there. Only strangers hurrying to their trains. Maybe I imagined it? Maybe it was a waking dream? I didn't know. But I felt it. Something had changed. I returned home. My heart was still beating too fast. I opened the drawer with his old letters. I sorted through them, over and over, until I found something that hadn't been there before. An envelope. No stamp. No return address. Only my name. His handwriting. I gripped it in my fingers. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a blank sheet of paper. I unfolded it, held it closer to the light. And suddenly, I saw faint imprints of letters. Mom, I'm sorry. I couldn't breathe. The world around me dissolved. I clung to that sheet, as if it held everything I had left. I read those 2 words dozens of times. But they explained nothing. Only left more questions. Why had he sent it now? Why hadn't he written anything else? Why hadn't he come? I didn't know the answer. But I knew one thing. Now I couldn't stop. Now I had to come to the station tomorrow. I couldn't sleep. The letter lay before me on the table. And I read it over and over again. Mom, I'm sorry it took so long. Those words felt like more than just an apology. They were a promise. A sign. A reminder that he was still somewhere out there. That he remembered me. And if he remembered, then maybe, just maybe, tomorrow he would come. I sat by the window, staring into the night sky. The moon hung low, its light spilling onto the floor, dissolving into the dimness. Everything around me felt unreal, as if I were already asleep, and this was just a dream. But if it was a dream, I didn't want to wake up. I picked up the letter and pressed it to my chest. I was afraid to lose it. Afraid that if I let it go, everything would disappear. This hope, this moment, this fragile thread that still connected me to him. I couldn't let it fade. I walked over to the mirror. The woman staring back at me was a stranger. Gray hair, fine lines on her face, tired eyes. I tried to remember the last time I had truly looked at myself. Not just seen my reflection, but looked at myself as a living person. I ran my hand over my cheek. These hands had once held his tiny fingers. These lips had kissed his forehead goodnight. These eyes had looked at him with love. But he hadn't seen them in so long. Just as I hadn't seen him. I walked to the dresser and carefully opened the top drawer. There, among old things, lay his childhood shirt. Small, white with blue stripes. I picked it up, ran my fingers over the fabric, pressed it to my cheek. The scent was gone. Only the memory remained. I remembered him as a child. How he ran to me, arms wide open. How he laughed, falling into the grass. How he looked up at me, trusting, as if I was his entire world. When did I stop being his world? When did that look disappear? I looked at the letter again. I'm sorry it took so long. I smiled. A small, barely noticeable smile. He would come back. I almost believed it. I walked to the closet and took out my old coat. The coat I always wore when I went to the station. I ran my fingers over the pocket. Inside, among the loose threads and small coins, lay his note. I pulled it out, carefully unfolded it. Mom, I will come back. I promise. How many times had I read these words? Hundreds. Thousands. But today, they might finally come true. I walked to my bed and sat on the edge. I wanted to sleep, but sleep wouldn't come. I was afraid of it. Afraid that if I closed my eyes, morning wouldn't arrive. Afraid that tomorrow would be just like all the other days. That he wouldn't come. That this letter was just a gesture, just forgiveness, but not a return. I closed my eyes and whispered into the darkness. Tomorrow. I woke up early. The house was quiet as always. But today it felt different. As if something invisible lingered in the air. Something that hadn't been here for a long time. Hope. I walked to the window. Outside, the morning was slowly breaking. I watched the world wake up. The trees swaying in the wind, the birds gathering on the wires, the streetlights flickering off, yielding to the sunlight. And I knew that today everything would change. I washed my face carefully, ran a comb through my gray hair. I put on my coat. I took a handkerchief from the drawer, one that had been there since the time when he was still home. A small detail, but it meant everything to me. I stepped outside and headed toward the station. I walked slowly, as if afraid to rush this day, afraid that if I took a step too quickly, it would vanish like a mirage. But it couldn't disappear. He would come back. I almost believed it. The station was alive as always. I heard the hum of voices, the sound of footsteps, the announcements. But today, I wasn't just listening. I heard. I felt. Every sound, every movement. Because today he would be here. I reached my bench, sat down, and began to wait. I sat on the bench staring ahead. Today, everything was supposed to change. I felt it in every fiber of my being. The air was thick with anticipation, like in childhood, when I would fall asleep on Christmas Eve, knowing that in the morning, I would find a gift under the tree. I couldn't imagine that he wouldn't come today. I didn't want to imagine it. I watched the people around me, their smiles, their hurried steps. Those who were saying goodbye, those who were reuniting, those who were rushing home. Maybe he was already here. Maybe he was already walking toward me. I felt someone's gaze. I froze. Slowly I lifted my head. The crowd. Faces, faces, faces. And then his silhouette. I froze. Tall. A dark coat. Light hair. He wasn't moving. He was just looking at me. My heart stopped. Was it him? I couldn't move. I wanted to call out to him, but my voice caught in my throat. He took a step back. Then another. And another. People passed between us, blocking my view. I stood up, gripping the edge of the bench with trembling fingers. But when the crowd cleared, he was gone. I rushed forward. My body suddenly came alive, my hands shook, my breath came in gasps. I searched for him with my eyes. I scanned the faces, the clothes, the footsteps. But he was nowhere to be seen. I took a few more steps. I looked behind the columns, glanced around, rose onto my toes as if that would help. But I was alone. I lowered my head. My breath was uneven. I felt something inside me collapse. Something shatter into pieces. He didn't come. He would never come. I returned to my bench. I didn't cry anymore. There was nothing left to cry for. Tears were for when there was still hope. And I had none left. I sat there until evening. People hurried to their trains, met their loved ones, hugged, laughed, said their goodbyes. I saw a woman throw herself into her husband's arms. I saw children running to their parents, reaching for them with tiny hands. I saw someone waiting for someone. I saw someone finding someone. But not me. Never me. I was the last to leave. I walked through the empty station, listening to my footsteps echo under the high ceilings. I stepped outside, inhaling the cool night air. I looked up at the sky, the stars, like that night when he left. I smiled, bitterly, quietly. I no longer believed I would ever see him again. But tomorrow, I would still come, because I didn't know how to do anything else. I am sitting at the station again, just like always, just like yesterday, just like a year ago, just like all these endless days, months, years that have passed since I watched him leave on that train. I no longer count time. I no longer wait. But I cannot leave. I watch people passing by. I no longer search for his face in the crowd. I no longer hope to see him among the passengers. I just watch. A woman with a child stands at the edge of the platform. The little boy grips her hand tightly, the way only children do when they're afraid of getting lost. "Mom, will the train come?" "Yes," she smiles, leaning down to kiss the top of his head. "It always comes." I flinch involuntarily. I no longer believe that. Now I know not all trains return, and not all passengers find their way back. I look at the tracks again. How many trains have I seen over the years? Hundreds. Thousands. But he was never on any of them. I remember how I once thought he would return unexpectedly. That one day, I would simply see him standing before me. That he would smile, spread his arms and say, "Mom, I'm sorry it took so long." And I would believe him. I would stand up, embrace him, run my fingers through his hair just to make sure he was real. But now I know that day will never come. Now I know he is not coming back. But still I cannot leave. I don't know how to live without this waiting. The world has forgotten him. But I remember. And as long as I remember he exists, I cannot let him disappear. I close my eyes. And once again I imagine the day he left. How he waved at me. How his train slowly pulled away from the platform. How his silhouette grew smaller and smaller until it disappeared completely. And I realized the truth. I didn't lose him today. And not even on the day he didn't come back to the station. I lost him that day many years ago when he boarded that first train. I just refused to admit it for too long. I feel the wind brush against my face. I hear the rhythmic clatter of the next train's wheels. I open my eyes. But I am no longer waiting. I no longer remember what color his eyes were. Once I could have said it instantly. Once I could close my eyes and see his face. I could remember his smile. I could hear his voice. But now he is becoming a ghost. I didn't realize right away that I was losing him. I just noticed one day that I could no longer remember how he laughed. How his voice sounded when he called me from another room. How he said, "Mom." I shut my eyes tightly, trying to pull that memory from the depths of my mind. But there was nothing. Only emptiness. I was afraid. I got out of bed and walked to the drawer where I kept his letters. I pulled one out at random. "You should see this city. It's huge." I ran my fingers over the paper. I searched for his voice in those words. But all I heard was silence. I took out an old photo album. I flipped through the pages. Here he was, small, running through a summer field covered in dust, his hair a wild mess. Here was his first school picture. Here he was as a teenager, with that same bold smile that seemed both childish and grown up at the same time. But the longer I looked, the less I recognized him. As if these photographs were of someone else. As if this boy had never called me mom. Panic gripped me. I grabbed one of the photos and pressed it to my chest. I cannot forget him. I have no right to forget him. If I forget him, then he is gone forever. I dressed quickly. I needed to leave the house. I needed to return to the one place where he still felt close. The station. When I sat on my bench again, the fear eased just a little. Only here, among the whistles of trains, among the voices, among the crowd, did I feel that he was still somewhere near. Maybe not here. Maybe only in my memory. But he was still with me. And that meant I could still wait. I sat at the kitchen table. In front of me, a sheet of paper, a pen, a glass of water half empty. I stared at that sheet for a long time, as if I didn't know why it was there. But I knew very well. I was going to write him another letter. But this time the last one. I held the pen in my hands, but I couldn't make myself begin. What words should I write? What do you say to someone who has forgotten you, but whom you can never forget? I took a deep breath and traced the first words. "My boy." My fingers froze. I felt my heart pounding, too loudly, too painfully. When was the last time I had called him that? Not on paper. Not in my thoughts. But in real life. I don't remember. I took a sip of water. Turned around. The house was eerily silent. I felt as if the walls were listening. I looked at the letter again. I didn't know what to write next. I could say that I had waited, but he already knew that. I could say that I loved him, but did I love him? Or did I only love his memory? I felt a tear slide down my cheek. I wiped it away quickly, as if afraid someone might see. But no one had been here to see for a long time. I picked up the pen again. I don't know why you never came. I don't know where you are now. I don't know if you are happy. But I know one thing, I am still here. I am still waiting for you. I set the pen down, read what I had written, and felt something strange. Emptiness. As if I hadn't written a letter, but a sentence for myself. I am still waiting. But why? What am I really waiting for? Him? Or the end? I folded the letter, placed it in an envelope, but I didn't write an address. I didn't know where to send it. I simply opened the old drawer, the one full of his letters, and placed another one inside. I closed my eyes. Somewhere far away the wind whispered. I imagined the station again, the bench, the train disappearing into the unknown, and myself, sitting, waiting. As always, I didn't know if this letter was my farewell to him, but I knew one thing. It wasn't a farewell to waiting, because I couldn't stop waiting. I couldn't stop believing. I had been dreaming more and more often. I didn't know when it started, but now whenever I closed my eyes I saw him. In this dream I was at the station again. I was sitting on my bench. The sun was bright, but it didn't blind me. People moved back and forth, but their footsteps were quiet. As if the world had slowed down, as if time here flowed differently. And then footsteps nearby. I turned my head. He stood before me. But it wasn't the man I had been waiting for. It was him just as I remembered him as a child. Small. With the same light hair that always fell onto his forehead. With the same look. Full of childhood tenderness and something I hadn't understood back then. I wanted to say something to him. Call his name. Embrace him. But I couldn't speak. Mom, he said. His voice was distant, muffled like an echo. You're still here? I nodded. You're still waiting? I nodded again. He looked at me the way children do when they want to ask something but are afraid of the answer. Are you waiting for me? I opened my mouth but no sound came. Only tears filled my eyes. He took a step closer. Looked straight into my soul. Mom, you know I'm not coming back, don't you? I gasped. I wanted to say it wasn't true. I wanted to tell him he was wrong. But I couldn't. He looked at me for so long that time seemed to stop. And then he turned and walked away. Just walked away. I wanted to run after him. But my legs wouldn't move. I tried to scream. But my voice was gone. I woke up screaming. The room was dark and cold. Somewhere a clock was ticking. I was shaking. I couldn't breathe. This dream was different. It was too real. Too honest. Too true. I couldn't fall asleep again. I just sat in bed, staring into the darkness. And in a whisper, I kept repeating, I'm still waiting. But now I didn't know why. I am sitting at the station again. Just like always. Just like yesterday. Just like all these endless days that have passed since he left. But something has changed. I feel it inside me. Since that dream I have become quieter. As if something inside me has broken. But not loudly, not violently, just silently, unnoticed, like old porcelain that has cracked over time. Now, I no longer search the faces of passers-by. I no longer scan the distance for a familiar figure. I no longer look for him. I no longer hope. But I still come. The station lives its own life. People reunite, embrace, cry, laugh. I no longer envy them. I just watch. Sometimes people sit beside me. Sometimes they glance at me briefly. But no one asks whom I am waiting for anymore. As if the world has stopped wondering about me. As if everyone has accepted that I am just part of the station. Like an old bench. Like the columns. Like the tracks leading to nowhere. I feel myself becoming invisible. Once I was afraid of forgetting his face. Now I realize that the world has forgotten mine. I don't know how much time has passed. I no longer count the days. Sometimes I wonder, what if I'm already gone? What if this station is the place where I'm stuck? Where I exist but do not live. But then I hear the hum of a train. I hear someone calling out a name. I see a mother smiling at her child adjusting his hat. I see someone running with a suitcase afraid of being late. The world continues. And that means I am still here. But I know. I am no longer a part of this world. I am just a shadow of the past that never learned how to leave. I close my eyes. I no longer pray. I no longer ask for him to come back. I just wait. And in this silence, someone sits down beside me. I open my eyes. And I see him. But it's not him. It's an old man in a worn-out coat. With tired eyes. With a faded bag. He looks at the tracks. Then at me. And asks, "May I?" I nod. He sits down. We say nothing. Then he speaks. I'm waiting for someone too. And that is how the conversation begins. The one that will change me forever. I was sitting on my bench. As always. Just like yesterday. Just like a year ago. But today someone was sitting beside me. An old man. Stooped, wrapped in a worn-out coat. His hands were covered in wrinkles, his nails neatly trimmed. On the floor beside him sat a large bag, old, its edges frayed, as if it had traveled many roads. He sat in silence just like me, just staring at the tracks. I wasn't even surprised when he spoke. "You've been sitting here a long time." It wasn't a question, just a statement. I didn't reply. Then he turned his head and looked at me. "I'm waiting for someone too." I lifted my eyes. Our gazes met. "Who?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. He stared ahead long and silently, and then he said, "I don't know." I felt something strange. Those words were familiar to me, as if they had lived inside me, but I had never spoken them aloud. I looked at him more closely. His eyes were tired but kind, deep like a well filled with stories he never told. And I understood. We were alike. "People don't wait for other people," he said, gazing thoughtfully at the tracks. "They wait for themselves." I frowned. "What do you mean?" He smiled faintly. "We wait for the moment when we can stop waiting." I froze. His words struck deeper than I expected. I wasn't waiting for him. I was waiting for the moment when I could stop waiting. I was waiting for the moment when I could let go. When I could finally tell myself the truth. But I couldn't. I didn't know how. I didn't want to. The man slowly stood up. He picked up his bag. But before he left, he said, "Do you know what's the scariest thing?" I looked at him. He smiled slightly, but there was too much pain in that smile. "One day, you'll realize you're not waiting for anyone anymore. And that will mean it's all over." I watched as he walked away, as he disappeared into the crowd, as he faded, leaving me alone. But his words stayed with me. I felt fear. I don't want to stop waiting, because if the waiting ends, then so will I. I still come to the station. Every morning, just like always. I put on my coat, carefully adjust my scarf, take my bag and leave the house. I walk slowly, not like before, when my heart pounded in my chest with anticipation. Now my steps are unhurried, steady, empty. I no longer search for him in the crowd. I no longer believe he will come. But I still come. The station hasn't changed. People still rush by. Trains still arrive and depart. Someone laughs. Someone cries. Someone waves goodbye. And I just sit. I watch. I am no longer waiting. I am simply here. Sometimes people sit beside me. They look at me with curiosity. Sometimes someone asks, "Are you waiting for someone?" I smile. Yes. But I no longer explain who. I no longer need to. I close my eyes and listen to the station. The sound of footsteps. The murmur of voices. The distant screech of brakes. The world moves on. But I have long since stopped being a part of it. I run my hands over the fabric of my coat. Once my fingers were young, strong, soft. They could hold, could warm, could protect. Now they tremble. Now they hold nothing. Now there is nothing left to protect. I don't know how many more years will pass. How many more trains I will see. How many more times I will watch as someone reunites with someone else. I only know one thing. I can no longer leave. If I leave, if I stop coming here, then I will have to admit that he is truly gone. Then he will no longer exist, even in my memory. Then he will disappear completely. And I cannot allow that. I won't allow that. I run my fingers over the folded note in my pocket. "Mom, I will come back. I promise." The paper is almost falling apart from time, but the words are still there. And as long as they are there, I am not alone. Through the station announcements, I hear a child's laughter. I open my eyes. A little boy, no older than 5, runs across the platform, waving his arms like wings. "Mom, look, I'm flying." A woman laughs and catches up to him, takes his hand. "Careful, don't fly too far." I smile. One day I will be gone. One day someone else will take my place on this bench. One day this station will forget me. But today, I am still here. I am still sitting on my bench. I am still holding his note in my hands. And even if he never comes back, I will still be here. I am still waiting. Subscribe to the channel and hit the like button so you don't miss more heartwarming stories.